The lights in Studio 6B were deceptively warm. Cameras hummed like distant insects, producers whispered behind clipboards, and the teleprompter blinked patiently with Jesse Waters' intro. It was meant to be a friendly segment, a rare moment where political lines blurred and studio smiles covered sharp edges. Waters grinned wide, polished and poised. Jasmine Crockett stepped into the frame with that same knowing poise, the kind born from courtrooms, not greenrooms. "Congresswoman Crockett," Jesse said, extending a hand as if they were old friends reuniting over coffee. She shook it. Jesse. Then, unexpectedly, they laughed. A shared chuckle, quick and bright. The audience didn't know what to make of it. On-screen chemistry? An inside joke? Neither. Just a moment. Unscripted. Fleeting. But Jesse, always the showman, saw his opening. "Glad we can laugh together," he smirked. "Even if you're here to defend government overreach, again." Crockett didn't flinch. "And I assume you're still out here defending corporations from accountability?" It wasn't hostile. Not yet. The smile never left Jesse's face. He was in his element, this was theater. But Jasmine was in hers too, and hers was reality. He leaned forward. "Let's get right to it. You've supported legislation expanding federal authority on election protections. Critics say that's just code for controlling the outcome. How do you respond?" She crossed one leg over the other, calm and clear. "I respond with the Constitution. The one you love quoting half of." The audience stirred. A quiet energy built behind the studio's sleek surfaces. Waters blinked, regrouped. "But surely," he pressed, "you agree states should have a say in how their elections are run. Otherwise, what's the point of federalism?" Crockett smiled again, but this time there was no laughter. "Federalism isn't a shield for suppression, Jesse. It's not a loophole for the powerful to redraw maps that silence black and brown voters. You know that. Or at least your researchers do. Silence. Just long enough for tension to sneak in." Jesse chuckled, but his eyes narrowed. "So, you're saying voter ID laws are racist?" "I'm saying they're selective," Jasmine replied. "When IDs are free, accessible, and the process isn't riddled with bureaucratic traps, sure, let's talk. But when they're used as political tripwires, we're not talking security, we're talking suppression." And just like that, the script was bending. Waters glanced to the side, his producer subtly gave him the signal to keep it going. But he didn't know, Jasmine Crockett hadn't even begun. The control room was tense. Jesse Waters' producers exchanged glances, some amused, others alarmed. Jasmine wasn't playing into the usual script. There was no soundbite simplicity, no verbal landmines to bait her with. Just clarity. And that made Jesse uncomfortable. "Well," he said with a light laugh, "that sounded a bit like a lecture." Jasmine leaned back slightly in her chair, her tone still steady. "If basic civic literacy sounds like a lecture, maybe we need more of them." The audience chuckled, not at her, but with her. Jesse felt the shift. He glanced at his notes, reaching for safer ground. "Let's pivot," he said, waving a hand. "Crime. You've opposed some policing bills Republicans support. Are you saying communities don't need stronger law enforcement?" "I'm saying they need smarter law enforcement," Jasmine answered instantly. "We've spent decades funding force, not trust. And we're surprised when people don't call 911. What they need is accountability. Training. Community-based approaches. You can't arrest your way into safety." Jesse tilted his head. "So defund the police?" "No," she replied. "Redesign the system. Don't twist it." It was too fast, too precise. Jesse leaned on what always worked, mockery. "Well, Congresswoman, maybe you should host the show. You've got all the answers." Jasmine smiled. "And yet somehow, you've still got all the airtime." Even the camera crew stifled grins. Jesse forced a laugh. "Look, I'm just asking what viewers are thinking. Then maybe your viewers should ask why they're only being shown half the truth," she said, turning toward the camera now. "America doesn't need more echo chambers. It needs mirrors." That line landed like a bell ringing through the studio. Jesse tried to jump back in, but it was clear, he'd lost control of the tempo. Jasmine wasn't debating to win points. She was speaking to something deeper, something Jesse couldn't punchline his way out of. The laugh they had shared at the start? It was gone. Replaced by a room that was now listening for something real. And Jasmine Crockett had just proven, she didn't need the last word to own the moment. The segment was supposed to wrap soon. Jesse's earpiece buzzed with countdowns, reminders to tease the next guest, but he ignored them. His pride was bruised. The smile was still on his face, but it had grown tight, more reflex than charm. So, he said, shuffling his papers theatrically, "Congresswoman, you talk a lot about trust in communities, but how can voters trust Democrats when cities under their leadership are falling apart?" It was a lazy jab, wide, sweeping, meant to rile. Jasmine didn't blink. "You mean cities like New Orleans?" she said. "Where Republican-led state interference stripped the local DA of resources?" The audience went quiet. "Or maybe Chicago," she continued. "Where poverty is generational, and your party keeps voting down funding for education, transit, and mental health?" Jesse raised his eyebrows. "Oh, so it's the GOP's fault now?" Jasmine leaned forward slightly. "You want numbers, Jesse?" He hesitated. She pulled a folded sheet from her blazer pocket. The studio camera zoomed in. "This," she said calmly, "is a breakdown of federal block grants denied to urban programs in the last 3 sessions, programs disproportionately affecting Black and Latino neighborhoods. Sponsored by Republicans. Blocked by Republicans." She placed the sheet on the table between them. "Receipts," she said. Jesse chuckled, trying to pivot. "I mean, I'm not in Congress." "Exactly," Jasmine cut in. "You're not. But you profit from mocking the people who are. And the people we represent." For a moment, Jesse didn't have a comeback. His laugh stalled in his throat. The audience could feel it. The crack in the performance. The loss of rhythm. She turned slightly toward the camera. "People watching this know what it's like to be dismissed with a smirk. They've lived it. You just broadcast it." In the control room, a producer whispered, "She just took the frame." And she had. With one sheet of paper and a voice that didn't waver, Jasmine Crockett had flipped the interview. It wasn't about politics anymore. It was about who gets to define truth, and who gets interrupted when they try to speak it. Jesse looked at his notes again. But nothing on that paper could fix what just happened. Jesse tried to recover by changing tone. He leaned back in his chair, adopting a lighter expression. "Okay, Congresswoman, fair enough. But what about inflation? I mean, come on, your party's policies aren't exactly helping folks at the gas pump." Jasmine didn't flinch. "Neither did your tax breaks for oil companies," she replied. "But you don't seem to mind inflation when it's padding corporate pockets." The room went still again. Jesse smirked, trying to maintain control. "So are you saying Americans should thank Democrats for higher prices?" "I'm saying," she said firmly, "that blaming a single party for a global economic shift is not just lazy, it's misleading. But I don't expect nuance to make the cut on your show." That one landed harder than Jesse expected. The smirk cracked for a moment. Jasmine leaned forward, her voice lower, but sharper. "You've built a career on punchlines. But people's lives? They're not punchlines. When your rent goes up, when your insulin costs triple, that's not comedy. That's survival. And survival doesn't have a laugh track." The audience murmured. Jesse blinked. She continued, "You know what's really funny? The fact that you think this performance can compete with lived experience. That smug look, the raised eyebrows, it might work on other guests, but I've stood in courtrooms where the stakes were real. This is just theater." Jesse looked into the camera, then back at her, trying to regain footing. "Well, you certainly came prepared to perform." "No," she said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I came prepared to tell the truth. If that feels like a performance, maybe you've forgotten what truth sounds like. The pause that followed wasn't empty. It was loaded with the recognition that Jasmine wasn't just debating. She was holding up a mirror. And Jesse, despite all his charisma and practiced wit, couldn't argue with his own reflection. By the time the segment break was called, no one was laughing. Jesse's tone had shifted. Jasmine's hadn't. She came in steady, and stayed there. And for the first time that hour, Jesse Waters looked unsure of what came next. The next segment returned from commercial with a wider camera angle and slightly dimmed lighting, standard Fox production polish. Jesse smiled at the lens, but anyone really watching could see it, the smile had less voltage. So, he began, let's talk crime. Another area where your party's soft policies are leaving Americans vulnerable. Jasmine didn't move. She waited for him to finish the sentence, fully. Not halfway, not mid-spin. Go ahead, she said softly. Define soft. Jesse blinked. Well, no cash bail. Which doesn't mean no consequences, she cut in. It means not criminalizing poverty. He opened his mouth again, but she was already moving. You love to cherry-pick headlines about crime in blue cities, she said. But let's be honest, crime isn't partisan. Red states lead in gun deaths, domestic violence, even opioid overdoses. What's soft is ignoring that for a narrative. There was no raise in pitch. No drama in her tone. Just cold clarity. Soft, she continued, is pretending to care about victims only when it fits a party line. Soft is cutting mental health funding, defunding community programs, and then blaming the people left behind. Jesse tried laughing it off. You're really laying it on thick, Congresswoman. No, she said calmly. I'm just tired of people pretending statistics don't speak louder than spin. And just like that, he was cornered again, not with heat, but with precision. In the control room, the director muttered, she's not flinching. Not even once. Back in studio, Jesse tried to pivot. So, is everything the GOP's fault? Not everything, Jasmine said. But when you keep setting the house on fire, you don't get to blame the people running for buckets. For a moment, even Jesse's studio audience stayed quiet. That line hit with the force of a gavel. The conversation wasn't just turning, it had turned. Jesse had walked into the segment assuming control. But Jasmine wasn't there to play the part he'd written for her. And now, for the first time on his own stage, it was Jesse Waters who looked like the guest. Jesse tried to claw back the narrative. He leaned in, interrupting mid-sentence. But don't you think? Let me finish, Jasmine said, without raising her voice. Just firm. Just final. He paused. She turned slightly toward the camera, never breaking rhythm. That's the thing about these conversations. The second it gets uncomfortable, someone jumps in. Someone shifts the subject. Someone talks over the part they don't want to hear. Jesse held a practiced grin, but his knuckles tensed around his pen. I've sat through hearings where people lied to my face, she continued. I've been lectured by men who never once asked what it feels like to represent communities they've never set foot in. But here's the difference, Jesse, when you talk over me, you don't silence me. You amplify me. The control room didn't cue a commercial. They knew better. Jesse forced a chuckle. You've got the floor, Congresswoman. No, Jasmine corrected, I took the floor. Because too many people watching this tonight have been talked over too many times. They know exactly what this feels like. And that's when something cracked, not in her, but in the show's facade. Jesse wasn't debating anymore. He was reacting. He was caught between the rules of TV and the weight of a conversation that had grown too large for his format. You want to talk accountability? She asked. Then let's talk about who's protected when the cameras stop rolling. Let's talk about whose version of the story makes it to air, and whose gets buried under punditry. The moment had grown, and Jessie couldn't shrink it. In living rooms across the country, people leaned closer. Some nodded. Some just stared. But no one looked away. Because for all his interruptions, Jessie had finally become quiet. And Jasmine? She had become undeniable. Sensing he was losing control, Jessie reached for his old fallback, humor. Well, he grinned, if this whole Congress thing doesn't work out, you've got a future in talk shows. You're on fire tonight. The audience gave a polite chuckle. But Jasmine didn't smile. She let the silence hang. Then, this isn't a performance, Jessie. It's a pattern. And I'm not here for laughs, I'm here for clarity. Jessie's grin stiffened. You joke, she continued, because it's easier than reckoning. Easier than asking why this country keeps circling the same conversations without progress. Her words weren't loud, but they didn't need to be. They landed with weight. I didn't come on this show to trade zingers. I came because your audience deserves better than a script dressed up as news. That line pierced through the studio haze. I'm tired of the dance, she said. We say, bipartisanship, but we don't mean it. We say, free speech, but only protect one side's voice. And we say, unity, but only when we're the ones setting the terms. Jessie shifted. For once, he had no line ready. No sarcasm to soften the moment. I represent people who live paycheck to paycheck, who work 2 jobs and still can't afford a dentist. They don't need punchlines, they need policies. They don't want comedy, they want commitment. Even the camera crew paused. You could hear it in the room, something had turned. And Jasmine didn't miss a beat. You've made a career out of being loud, Jessie. But volume isn't the same as vision. She leaned forward, calm and unshaken. Tonight, I'm not giving you a viral clip. I'm giving you a mirror. Jessie blinked. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was honest. And for the first time on his own set, Jesse Waters wasn't the one holding the mic. Jasmine was. The commercial break couldn't come fast enough. Jesse finally reached for his mug, glanced at the crew, and muttered, "Let's take 5." But Jasmine stayed still, eyes fixed, voice calm. You wanted a conversation, Jessie? Then let's have one, without the lights, without the fake nods, without the tap dancing for sponsors. He smirked, but the mask was thinning. Behind the glass, producers exchanged nervous glances. One of them mouthed, "Just let her go." Jasmine took a breath and turned to the studio audience. You've been told for years who to fear. Who's un-American. Who's a threat. But nobody told you to fear silence. Nobody warned you what happens when truth gets muted in favor of comfort. A woman in the front row, older, white, arms crossed when she first entered, was now leaning forward. Jessie wants to ask if I'm angry. Let me be clear, I'm focused. Because when you represent people who are constantly erased, you don't have time to scream. You learn to speak in a way that sticks. Jessie sat straighter, trying to interject. No, Jasmine said, holding up a finger. You had your segment. You had your spin. Now you get to listen. The audience murmured, not with discomfort, but with agreement. I've seen the panels. I've watched the headlines shift. And I've seen how people like you use humor to smother the urgency out of every issue that affects people who don't look like you. It wasn't an accusation, it was a fact. And yet, somehow, I'm still here. Still standing. Still answering questions you won't ask yourself. Jesse's silence said everything. Not because he had nothing to say, but because he finally realized. He wasn't the main event. He was the setup. And Jasmine? She was the truth that shattered it. As the cameras blinked back on, Jesse tried to reclaim control. "Well," he said, voice clipped with charm, "I think my audience might need a little breather after that sermon." Jasmine didn't flinch. Maybe they need a shift instead of a breather. Maybe they're ready for one. The room froze again, not from tension, but from realization. "I didn't come here to dismantle you," she said. "I came to dismantle the idea that platforms like yours get to define what's normal and what's radical." Jesse blinked, unsure if this was still his show. "You frame every conversation like it's a sport, left versus right, right versus wrong. But some of us are out here fighting to eat, Jesse. To vote. To survive. That's not a debate. That's a reality." The audience was dead quiet. "This isn't about ideology," she said. "It's about dignity." She leaned in. "And dignity doesn't need a laugh track." Jesse tried one last pivot. "Look, I think we can both agree, America needs open dialogue." Jasmine nodded. "Absolutely. But open doesn't mean equal if only one side brings the facts and the other brings punchlines." That one landed hard. "And let me tell you something else," she said. "This isn't new for me. Being underestimated. Being interrupted. Being mocked. I've seen it in courtrooms. I've seen it in committee hearings. And now I've seen it here." She stood slowly. "But every time it happens, I remember who's watching." She turned toward the camera. "Somewhere out there, a girl is being told she's too loud, too bold, too smart, too black, too much. And if she's watching right now, I want her to know, she's exactly enough." No applause. Just silence. Then one clap. Then two. And soon the whole audience stood. Not for Jesse. For Jasmine. Jesse sat still. The studio lights were hot, but his face had cooled. Jasmine had already removed her mic, handing it to a stunned stagehand before stepping off the carpeted platform. No wave. No smug look. Just presence. Measured and whole. Outside, the sun was setting over Manhattan. Jasmine stepped into the light, her phone buzzing non-stop, press requests, text messages, missed calls. But she didn't reach for it. Not yet. She breathed in, sharp and full, the kind of breath you take when you know something just shifted. Inside the studio, the control room was frozen. No one dared cut to commercial right away. Jesse looked at his producer behind the glass, as if to say, "What now?" What now was exactly the point. Back at home, millions watched the clip as it went viral within minutes. It was everywhere. Not because it was loud. But because it was true. People didn't replay it for the confrontation. They replayed it for the clarity. The way Jasmine didn't flinch. The way she turned Jesse's smirk into a mirror. In a high school in Detroit, a civics teacher paused class to show the final 30 seconds. "That," she said, "is how you speak power without shouting." In Baton Rouge, a father who hadn't watched a political show in years texted his daughter. "You've got that Jasmine kind of strength." And in Washington, 3 members of Congress, all on opposite sides, shared the clip. No comment. Just signal. Meanwhile, Jesse's show posted the interview with the headline. "Unexpected fire, Congresswoman Crockett speaks her mind." But it wasn't unexpected to those who knew. Jasmine didn't torch the place. She lit a match. Enough to burn down the script, not the room. And by morning, producers were already whispering. "We need her back." But Jasmine? She wasn't waiting for another invite. She never needed one. She had something bigger now. A voice that couldn't be edited. And a nation that finally heard her. What just happened wasn't a takedown, it was a transformation. Jesse Waters invited Jasmine Crockett to laugh. She walked in with grace. And walked out having rewritten the rules. No shouting. No personal attacks. Just truth, delivered with steel in her spine and calm in her voice. She didn't crush his show. She elevated the conversation. Because Jasmine didn't come to play a part in someone else's narrative. She came to remind us. You don't need a louder mic. You need a clearer message. And when that message is real, even the laughs go silent.